Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission here is, well, it's pretty simple. We take a stack of truly compelling sources, articles, and new research, and we shake it all up.
We distill it down.
Exactly. We distill out the essential knowledge so you can walk away feeling, thoroughly informed with plenty of aha moments.
And hopefully a few good laughs along the way.
Oh, definitely. And today we are strapping ourselves in for a deep dive into an article that views history, theology, and foundational mythology with a level of irreverence that is, I think, honestly quite necessary.
It really is. We're looking at a narrative that has shaped centuries, but through a lens of this profound, hilarious skepticism.
It's fantastic.
That's right. Our mission today centers on just one source, and it's a fascinating thought experiment. We're distilling the core argument and the specific, often surprising examples used in this article.
And what's the goal with that?
To understand a really fundamental concept, how cultural narratives evolve over time. I mean, we aren't interested in preservation here. We're interested in mutation.
Mutation, I like that.
How stories are changed, often by accident, sometimes maliciously, and almost always humorously or over the span of generations.
We're essentially looking at 2,000 years of history as what? One massive consequential game of broken telephone.
A very, very long game of it.
The central source for this incredible conversation, and trust me, it's a journey that will stick with you, is the Jesus and the Clumsy Squad article on Substack.
It is audacious.
So audacious and witty, and frankly, we couldn't stop highlighting quotes as we read it. The author has a gift for taking the most sacred of concepts and placing them under a modern, highly pragmatic, and very funny microscope.
Yeah, it's the kind of writing that doesn't just ask what happened, but how the story about what happened managed to survive and, mutate.
Which is the real question, isn't it?
It is, and that's a rare and valuable combination.
Yep.
It encourages, I think, necessary critical thought while keeping the tone really light and engaging.
Absolutely. And before we get into the nuts and bolts of the cosmic Marvel franchise theory, which is a phenomenal analogy, we have to make a vital recommendation. If you love the way this author takes apart history, theology, and popular belief with such sharp wit, please do yourself a favor and subscribe to the About Something publication on Substack.
It's essential reading.
It really is. Essential reading for anyone interested in why we believe what we believe. Hit that subscribe button to support the author's incredibly entertaining work, and while you're there, definitely consider a paid subscription.
You won't regret it. The depth and humor they bring to these topics is just... it's top-notch.
Okay, so let's unpack this premise. The article opens with a bang.
It really does.
It compares the believability of Jesus' story to a very short, very odd list of cultural figures. Santa Claus, the Easter Bunny, and Michael Jackson.
And that's where you know it's going somewhere interesting.
And here's where it gets really interesting. The article deems Michael Jackson the most plausible of the bunch.
And the initial audacity of that comparison isn't just for shock value. It sets the entire stage for the humorous critique, and it's all based on the concept of evidence.
Evidence.
Yeah.
So why Michael Jackson?
Because, as the author points out, he left receipts.
He left documented, physical, widely observed receipts. I mean, he sang, he danced, he changed color, he turned into a werewolf for a high-production music video.
A zombie in another.
And possibly a vampire if you look closely at the tabloids.
Yeah.
And people still looked at all that visible, documented transformation, however strange, and went.
Yeah, seems legit.
That's just Michael.
Right. It establishes this contemporary baseline for plausibility through documentation. You have a figure who is filmed, whose skin color visibly changed, whose appearance morphed radically over decades.
And his reality, however strange and fantastic, was accepted as genuine by millions in real time.
Exactly. So the argument being set up here is, if that level of visible, documented, and bizarre transformation isn't considered divine intervention or a miracle, why is a story that happened in a distant past, with no film, no photos, and only decades later written testimonies, treated as fundamentally different?
That's such a powerful framing device. It suggests that our modern standard for accepting the bizarre requires physical, verifiable evidence, even if that evidence is just a high-quality music video.
And when you contrast that with figures whose core stories rely on events that are, by their very nature, unobservable resurrection, walking on water, spontaneous conception.
The contrast becomes the jumping-off point for the article's entire analysis. It's brilliant.
And speaking of that critique, the article's core mechanism for how this mythology developed is the idea that the entire story is a 2,000-year-long game of Chinese whispers.
Yes.
And this isn't just an analogy, it's the operational hypothesis for the whole piece.
This is truly the genius of the article's framing. It defines the mechanism by which history, especially religious history, gets so warped. And we all know the fundamental rule of Chinese whispers, or broken telephone, right?
Of course.
You start with an innocent factual sentence, it goes around a circle, and it comes back sounding like something you'd immediately deny in front of HR.
Or maybe a judge. It never, ever gets cleaner. The rule is absolute. The source material says it just picks up filth as it rolls downhill, accumulating error, exaggeration, and embellishment.
It's an analogy that perfectly captures the idea of narrative accretion.
What's that?
Where every retelling, every translation, every cultural shift adds a layer of misunderstanding or exaggeration or sometimes just purposeful embellishment to make the story punchier.
And the scale of this specific game is just, it's astronomical.
We're not talking about 10 kids in a circle after a boring Sunday lunch. The scale here is thousands of people across centuries, cultures, languages.
And deserts.
And crucially, deserts hot enough to cook your brain into mush. That environmental and temporal context is so vital.
Oh, absolutely. Think about the conditions. Imagine the sheer monotony of life in that era. Lack of reliable mass media, lack of literacy, and just lots of open sky.
The ability to be entertained by a passing story was paramount.
And you compound that boredom with the harsh realities of desert life sunstroke, dehydration, and the need for communal entertainment. So naturally, the story, whatever mundane anecdote it started as,
It's just mutated.
It mutated into something completely unrecognizable to the original storyteller.
The article calls that mutated, sprawling, epic narrative a cosmic Marvel franchise.
Which is perfect.
It went from a local anecdote about a charismatic, possibly misguided teacher to a sprawling epic with resurrection, demons, and superpowers that fundamentally changed global civilization.
The stakes had to escalate continually. They had to, both to maintain the interest of the listener base across vast distances and to survive the process of cultural transmission.
Right. If the original story was just John the Baptist's cousin is a nice guy,
I wouldn't have crossed the Mediterranean.
not a chance.
But if the story is he can shoot lasers and defeat death, suddenly you have global relevance.
You've got a blockbuster. And this leads us to the article's critique of the historical evidence regarding his existence. They acknowledged there was evidence a guy named Jesus existed.
Right, but they immediately follow up.
They immediately say that Jesus was simply a common name, basically the John of the region.
And that is a crucial, historically grounded point designed to deflate the theological mystery. The existence of a person named Yeshua or Jesus is plausible, if not historically certain.
It was a deeply common name.
Very common. But the existence of that specific Jesus, the one who walks on water, commands legions of angels, and resurrects, that's the narrative question.
The article is drawing a critical distinction between historical presence and theological identity.
Precisely.
And certainly not the blonde, blue-eyed guy we see plastered on every devotional image, every painting, every dramatic movie.
Though definitely not that guy.
That image is the ultimate example of something the article identifies as cultural inculturation.
That term, cultural enculturation, while academic, is vital here and needs a little unpacking.
Okay, let's do it.
It means the adaptation of the gospel or a religious message to fit the culture in which it's being preached. It's not necessarily malicious, but it's a massive form of narrative warping.
So why did that process produce a distinctly European-looking figure?
Well, because the story had to travel to Europe, specifically to Roman and later Germanic and Nordic cultures, to achieve global dominance.
I see.
A dark-skinned, bearded man in desert robes, historically accurate for a first-century Judean, was, well, he was alien to them.
Right.
But a figure with soft features, light hair, and flowing robes, who looks like a Roman or later, a Renaissance Italian. He's instantly relatable and, crucially, visually palatable to the consumer.
It screams shampoo commercial.
It does, because it is a marketing decision, a highly successful one, to conform the image to the consumer's expectations, moving away from historical reality entirely.
It's the ultimate localization feature in the franchise. It has to look like the audience that's buying the ticket.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And the process is relentless. The figure who started as a desert teacher becomes Europeanized, then Americanized, until he looks less like a Middle Eastern man and more like a gentle, bearded guy from a college town.
The story is constantly evolving to remain relevant and marketable.
Always.
That idea of continuous evolution brings us perfectly into our second section, where we analyze these narrative mutations more closely. We're talking translation and the the exponential expansion of the story itself.
Right. And if we look at the narrative process outlined in the article, it perfectly illustrates how stories expand to fit the needs of the audience. They just keep moving up the scale of importance until they become unstoppable.
So it's a clear and necessary progression.
It is. A local teacher becomes a healer because people need tangible benefits. A healer becomes a prophet who can predict or interpret larger events. And eventually,
a prophet becomes God. A prophet becomes God. Because only divinity can sustain a permanent institution. The stakes must continually be raised to maintain interest and, critically, to justify the authority structure that develops around the story.
The article uses a fantastic comparison when analyzing the Gospels, which are the earliest written forms of this evolving narrative. We're encouraged to look at the earliest accepted Gospel, Mark, where Jesus is portrayed as much more human. He gets angry, he seems genuinely surprised when his miracles work, and he questions his own destiny.
Mark is the gritty Indy pilot episode.
Yes.
Where the hero is still unsure of himself and his powers. But by the time you reach the latest canonical gospel, John written perhaps 50 years later for a much more theologically developed audience, Jesus is practically floating and shooting lasers.
And the vulnerability is gone.
It's completely gone. The struggle is replaced by cosmic certainty.
The narrative arms race is fully engaged by the time we get to John. In Mark, you see the struggle in Gethsemane. In John, you get the famous I am statements, explicit claims to divinity and cosmic power. It's a completely different character.
Totally. Which proves the article's point about authors evolving a franchise.
That's why the article draws that analogy to analyzing Batman. You know, we wouldn't analyze Batman as a single consistent psychological entity.
Of course not.
We recognize he's a character written by dozens of different authors over 80 years, each bringing their own emphasis. The gospel authors, writing decades apart, sometimes in different languages with different theological agendas, they show that same pattern of evolutionary storytelling.
And they're doing it to satisfy the needs of their contemporary growing church audiences.
Exactly.
Okay, here's where the humor meets the most factually grounded critique in the article. The story of the Virgin Mary translation.
Yes.
I love this part because it shows how one simple linguistic error, or maybe a critical choice in emphasis, can spawn an entire global belief system.
This is a textbook example of the power of translation in shaping history. The article points out that in the original Hebrew text, the term used to describe Mary was Alma.
Alma?
Now, Alma is a fluid term. It certainly means young woman, but it can also imply virginity, often contextually. It wasn't definitively, medically specific.
But when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek, specifically the Septuagint, which was a translation undertaken for Greek-speaking Jews in the 3rd century BCE.
That fluidity just disappeared.
Right.
Precisely. The translators chose the word Parthenos, which explicitly means virgin. That single word choice, whether intentional to increase the miraculous nature of the prophecy or a genuine mistranslation of emphasis, had seismic, worldwide implications.
It transformed a commonplace occurrence, a young woman having a child, into a divine event.
And that, as the author dryly notes, is the ultimate marketing spin. Young woman Mary doesn't create a religion.
No, she doesn't. Young woman Mary just creates a local scandal, which fades.
Exactly. But Virgin Mary, that creates a franchise.
Franchise?
And that franchise suddenly gets you a religion, it gets you cathedrals, it gets you cross jewelry, and it gets you a massive global candle business.
It takes a potential source of shame, an unwanted pregnancy in a rigid cultural context, and turns it into the miraculous foundation stone for global theology. The stakes were raised exponentially with that single noun change.
But wait, I have to challenge that premise slightly based on the material we have. Are we truly suggesting that this global religion rests on one single translational leap?
Good question.
Or was there perhaps a cultural appetite for the idea of a divine virgin birth already existing in the ancient world?
That's an essential question, and the article addresses the cultural appetite indirectly through the concept of narrative duct tape.
Narrative duct tape, I like that.
While the specific translation provided the definitive word, the concept of a human hero having divine parentage was already rampant in Greek and Roman mythology. Think Hercules, Dionysus, or Perseus.
So the idea was already out there.
Exactly. The storytellers needed a clean, elevated explanation for the hero's origin, and virgin birth provided the cleanest, most universally recognized mythological motif for purity and divine intervention.
I see. So the Parthenos choice satisfied a pre-existing mythological need and instantaneously provided a resolution to the obvious problem.
The pregnancy itself.
Exactly. Once that translational leap was made, once you have the franchise title, you need narrative duct tape to hold the story together, specifically explaining the logistics of the pregnancy.
The problem immediately arises. How do you explain the pregnancy without a father, especially a known human father?
Right. The article jokes that the father was presumably the blonde bloke from the village, but that doesn't sell a franchise.
No. So the solution had to be divine. They invented spontaneous conception,
which the article hilariously modernizes and labels wireless coitus or Bluetooth baby.
I mean, it's a wonderful way of synthesizing a complex theological concept into modern, relatable absurdity.
It is. The explanation had to jump over the gap in knowledge how is Mary pregnant, and that gap was immediately filled with the most convenient, powerful explanation available. God did it.
It was the quickest, cleanest way to resolve the conflict introduced by the Parthenos translation and protect the honor of the central figure.
And the article implies that Mary, witnessing the swift global acceptance of this explanation, must have been thinking, I can't believe they bought that. Maybe there is a God after all.
The belief itself is justified after the lie takes hold, because the story solved a monumental social problem for her.
It speaks to the deeply opportunistic nature of belief when it provides a narrative that fundamentally solves a personal or social crisis. In that cultural context, avoiding the label of public shame by claiming divine intervention was the ultimate survival strategy.
And reputation management.
Totally. The ultimate win-win. Mary gets status and the followers get a miracle.
And we cannot forget the tragicomic fate of Joseph, the stepdad. He gets sidelined immediately.
Poor Joseph.
The article gives him a brilliant, if perhaps slightly insulting title. The patron saint of not my problem.
Joseph's role is incredibly telling about narrative priorities. He is the quiet, suffering footnote in the greatest franchise launch in history.
He deserves a medal, according to the article.
He really does. For having to raise the kid anyway, knowing the backstory may have involved the blonde bloke. Joseph had to absorb all the social stigma of being the non-father, the man who provided cover and stability to a story that fundamentally excludes him from the main event.
He's the original beta male, taking on the responsibility without receiving any of the credit or glory. That's a very human moment injected into a divine narrative.
And it highlights a specific narrative requirement. The story needed a protector, a provider, but not a genetic contributor. Joseph fulfills that role perfectly. The original plot twist was so good, the child god plot twist, that it utterly ruined all the other, more mundane versions of the story.
That version, however improbable, stuck.
It was superglued into humanity's subconscious, as the article observes.
That sets us up perfectly for Section 3, which tackles the massive counterargument often leveled against people who try to deconstruct faith. The issue of martyrdom.
And this is where the article gets incredibly blunt and insightful, transitioning from narrative construction to human psychology.
The common defense against the idea that the story is merely evolved gossip is, but the disciples died for their faith. They wouldn't have died for a lie.
Right. And the article's response is immediate, brutal, and very funny. That proves nothing except that they were terrible liars or tragically sincere.
It's harsh.
It is, but look at the escalation of the story, or the bit, as the author calls it. The stakes became impossibly high. It started with a cover-up. Mary got pregnant, but it was God. Shh.
Then it became a miracle. He cured my leprosy.
Then the party trick. He turned water into Pinot Grigio, and then the absolute top-shelf all-in claim, which is the cornerstone of the entire faith.
He rose from the dead.
Exactly.
I love the mental image the article conjures here. The author questions why none of the 12, seeing the growing mob, seeing the Roman soldiers loading up the cross, didn't just whisper to Peter.
The first apostle, yeah.
Yeah. Dude, we need to end the bit. Tell him about the blonde guy. Tell him about the cheap wine. I'm sorry I exaggerated the fish story. They're going to kill us for a pun.
The refusal to end the bit, even when facing imminent, agonizing death, is the central puzzle here. They don't back down. They stand ready for crucifixion, for torture, for persecution.
So this refusal to confess the truth leads directly to the core psychological explanation the article provides for their behavior.
The sunk cost fallacy.
Okay, let's slow down here. We need to fully elaborate on the sunk cost fallacy because the article posits this as the primary, most powerful motivation for accepting martyrdom.
Right. So the sunk cost fallacy is a concept from economics and behavioral psychology, and it dictates that we are driven to continue an endeavor, even when it is clearly failing or illogical or based on a false premise.
Why?
because of the time, money, or energy we have already irrevocably invested, the sunk cost. The investment is just too great to cut our losses.
And for the disciples, that debt was astronomical.
Absolutely. The article notes the severity of their investment. I mean, you can't spend 3 years walking around the desert giving up your established livelihood.
Many were fishermen, which was a decent trade.
A good trade. And you're surviving purely on charismatic crumbs and faith healing, and then you're supposed to admit to the world, and more importantly to yourself, that you were fundamentally wrong.
The psychological cost of admitting the entire foundation of your last 3 years was a lie is just. It's utterly unbearable.
It's far easier to die a hero than to live as a fool.
So they weren't dying for objective truth. They were dying to protect their identity.
Their identity and the only story they had left that justified their lives and sacrifices. Martyrdom became the only psychologically coherent next step in preserving their sense of self.
So the narrative had ceased being an external belief. It had fused with who they were as individuals.
Completely. To deny the resurrection story would be to deny themselves and invalidate every single sacrifice made over those years. They had to double down on the narrative.
That deep-seated psychological compulsion is why the article uses that dark humor about poor Bartholomew's lawyer, arguing that his client simply misheard the ending of a very long game of Chinese whispers.
They were paying the ultimate price because they couldn't just say, wait, it was just a really good nap.
It was too late. The cost was already paid. The investment of their professional lives, their social standing, their personal conviction, it all meant the only way out was forward.
Into martyrdom.
And the article doesn't just stop at psychology. It connects this argument to broader, darker historical examples to solidify the point.
That high-stakes commitment proves sincerity, not validity.
Yes, the uncomfortable examples of cults and fanaticism.
It drives home the painful fact that people die for false beliefs all the time, often with intense sincerity. The commitment level of the disciples is not unique proof of objective truth.
The article lists kamikaze pilots
Who died for a mythologized emperor in a war that was already lost.
cult members at Jonestown.
Who tragically drank poison based on the delusion of their leader.
And Heaven's Gate followers.
Who committed mass suicide believing a spaceship was hiding behind a comet. All died for things that were objectively untrue or based on catastrophic delusions.
So the powerful conclusion here is, being willing to die proves intense commitment and profound stubbornness.
But it doesn't prove that the story happened as described.
They became the first and most tragic victims of their own Chinese whisper game.
By the time the Romans started killing people, the disciples were no longer in on the joke. They had fully internalized the escalating story.
They drank their own Kool-Aid.
Completely. Martyrdom proves sincerity, but it offers zero evidence of validity.
That is a harsh but logically consistent argument drawn directly from the psychological mechanisms described. It really helps us understand the why behind the actions, separating the theology from the behavioral science.
Okay, let's pivot.
Let's pivot now to Section 4, where we tackle the ultimate marketing strategy of the faith, centering on the differential appeal of heaven versus hell.
And the article is brutally funny about the destination incentives offered to recruits.
It begins with a deep critique of heaven,
which is pitched as a severe letdown, especially when compared to the excitement of earthly life, however brief it is. The article describes heaven as a retirement village with better lighting.
And the rules are incredibly restrictive. The article details the mandates. Angels, golden-curled cherubs, harps, absolutely no swearing, no drinking, no sex.
And what sounds like an arbitrarily early bedtime at 5 p.m.
And of course, absolutely no sins allowed, which for any human sounds like a fast track to misery.
The author asks the crucial comedic question. Who listens to more than 5 minutes of harp anyway?
I mean, the point stands.
It does.
Yeah.
The concept of internal, purified, rest endless, sanitized serenity seems, to the average human motivated by curiosity and passion, incredibly boring.
If the narrative requires lifetime devotion and extreme sacrifice, the reward should be more enticing than eternal, quiet tedium.
You'd think so.
Now, contrast that with the marketing appeal of hell. This is where the story truly shines as a successful piece of commercial literature.
Hell sounds like a highly specific, intense holiday package designed for the reckless.
Heat, chaos, and guaranteed questionable decisions. The idea of eternal burning is described as sounding like a heavy metal band the author would happily pay big bucks to see live.
It has an inherent chaotic excitement and a visceral, terrifying draw that the overly sanitized heaven completely lacks.
And this leads to the core marketing insight provided by the article. Faith may move mountains, but fear moves civilizations.
Which taps directly into the psychological principle of loss aversion.
Okay, we need to unpack loss aversion again, but specifically in the context of religious marketing.
Right. So loss aversion, as a principle, states that humans are generally twice as motivated by the fear of losing something or experiencing pain than they are by the potential gain of receiving something.
The threat of hell eternal, specific, visceral pain is a far stronger motivator than the vague promise of heaven.
Exactly. The promise of eternal sanitized serenity just doesn't hit as hard.
So, if you are a narrative constructor trying to maximize behavioral compliance and subscription retention,
you lead with the stick, not the carrot. The threat of hell becomes the strongest mechanism for control.
Which makes the religious structure the first true, extremely effective subscription service. Believe or burn forever.
And this leads to the article's critique of the supreme being's pettiness. If God is real, the article argues, he is running the longest, pettiest power trip in history.
The central critique is the absurdity of the punishment versus the crime.
It's completely out of proportion.
We're talking about an omnipotent supreme being who creates the entire universe. But could simply snap his fingers and wipe away the offense, yet he threatens you with eternal agonizing fire because you stole biscuits in year 3.
Or told a white lie on a Tuesday, the author asks. Imagine being that emotionally fragile and requiring perfect, constant obedience just to maintain your ego.
And the dissonance that this creates in believers is profound. The article highlights that people are emotionally devastated when something awful happens to a child here on Earth.
As they should be.
Yet Christians are described as being oddly chill about a cosmic, loving father who is willing, even eager, to toss his own disobedient kids into eternal hellfire.
Chased by Beelzebub, or the demonic sheepdog.
That demonic sheepdog imagery is a perfect encapsulation of the way this theology, for all its grandness and pronouncements of love, ultimately resorts to fear.
And almost childish, albeit terrifying, threats to maintain obedience. It reveals the transactional nature of the belief system. You must behave perfectly to avoid the dog.
It is important, as the article notes, to provide context on the aesthetic of hell itself.
Oh, yeah.
Because the Bible, frankly, is quite vague about the pitchforks and the specific levels of heat.
Indeed. The frightening yet appealing aesthetic of hell that we recognize in pop culture defines the experience far more than the original scriptures. The article attributes much of this terrifying structural fanfiction to later authors.
We're talking Dante Alighieri and John Milton.
Exactly. Dante's The Divine Comedy and Milton's Paradise Lost essentially formalize the brand guidelines for hell.
The Bible offers concepts of punishment. These authors offered specifications, maps, and character design.
They really did. The visual idea of the devil, the pitchforks, the specific hierarchical suffering, and even the demonic sheepdog is largely a medieval and Renaissance invention.
And why? Why then?
Because it was specifically designed to be visceral and terrifying, effective for keeping the non-literate peasant population in line.
So the original story, even if it was just gossip, was ruthlessly edited and aesthetically expanded to maximize its impact and social control.
It's evolution driven by political necessity. Absolutely. The article notes that the people who invented the story were bored, they needed entertainment, and they had imagination to spare.
And once the core concepts were written down, they became the best moments and greatest hits in the Bible.
But then kings, popes, and councils edited it, re-edited it, and censored it to suit political and institutional needs. They kept what worked for governance and discarded what didn't.
And the most dramatic, successful piece of literature they kept was the Apocalypse.
Of course. You never cut the blockbuster finale. The Apocalypse, or Revelation, was, and remains, a powerhouse of narrative tension. The article calls it, basically, the Lord of the Rings of its time.
I can see that. It has all the epic battles, complex mythologies, bizarre creatures, and high stakes that a bored populace could possibly ask for.
It provided meaning, a glorious ending, and an explanation for all current pain. Tolkien didn't need mushrooms, the article suggests. He had the Old Testament and Revelation. The material was already rich with epic fantasy.
That transition from political editing to narrative consumption leads us beautifully to our final section, where the article pulls back to look at the bigger picture, the transformation of information and the core human need for meaning.
Right. To conclude the analysis of how these stories evolve, The article references the great chemist Antoine Lavoisier from 1789, who stated, "In nature, nothing is lost, nothing is created, everything is transformed."
And the article applies that foundational scientific principle directly to gossip, to matter, to energy, and to the narratives we create.
Everything is constantly being transformed, and this relentless transformation, according to the author, stems from one core problem: our inherent human inability to accept meaninglessness.
The fundamental root problem is confronting the possibility that life has no built-in cosmic purpose.
That we came from what the article cheekily calls a good shag, most of us by accident, and that we will return to nothingness, no heaven, no virgins, no hell, tragic, no limbo, just the credits rolling into oblivion.
Yeah, it is the cold knot in the stomach that the article mentions. The universal realization that you don't want to die, that it feels inherently unfair, because the only certainty in life is that it ends.
We spend our lives, however briefly, trying to understand existence and invariably failing spectacularly. And that powerful drive to find certainty, that desperate search for comfort, is what fuels the acceptance and propagation of these elaborate, transforming narratives.
We are looking for a light, a narrative explanation, a continue button for when things get too hard or too meaningless.
So what does the article conclude about the role of faith, if not as objective truth?
It views faith as a tool.
A tool, yeah.
Yeah.
A deeply necessary tool, perhaps, especially because we are so culturally accustomed to it. Faith is comforting. It provides structure and community.
In our times, it serves as that continue button, a reason to keep going when rational explanation fails.
The directive from the author is pragmatic. Believe in whatever helps you live better, whatever narrative provides you comfort, but always remember it's just a tool.
It shouldn't be mistaken for objective reality, or it becomes a weapon.
Exactly.
And finally, the article wraps up with a cynical, yet strangely empowering entrepreneurial twist, which brings the humor full circle.
Since the entire system works by people making up stories to cope with fear and meaninglessness, why not be proactive and optimize your coping mechanism?
The final provocative recommendation is, invent your own God.
A personalized deity. I love that idea. Tailored to your exact needs.
Yes, one who is functional and not harmful. A God who doesn't send people to burn forever for petty offenses. Who doesn't judge you for stealing biscuits because you were genuinely hungry.
And who actually helps you when things get rough. A deity with your face, your flaws, and your humor.
Something real enough to matter to you. And imaginary enough not to hurt anyone else.
And of course, the final entrepreneurial jab for those who are cynical and motivated enough.
If you are truly entrepreneurial, you could even make money off it, just like many already do with existing narratives.
The author suggests that the true pursuit of hell might be watching people charge admission fees in his name, whether it's the name of Jesus or the name of your newly invented, infinitely chill deity.
It summarizes the entire critique. The divine story started as a series of errors and exaggerations, and now it is a global, profit-driven, narrative-controlling enterprise.
That was a deep, winding road. From Michael Jackson's dance moves to the sunk cost fallacy, the marketing disaster of heaven, and the ultimate pitch for customized deity creation.
This was a genuine deep dive into how belief systems form and sustain themselves, not through divine mandate, but through very human mechanisms.
Boredom, miscommunication, psychological avoidance of shame, and loss aversion.
Indeed. We've thoroughly traced the story from its inception as a common name to its evolution from young woman to the global franchise.
We've analyzed the comedic tragedy of the clumsy squad doubling down on their story despite the threat of execution, and we've critiqued the flawed but highly effective marketing plan that leveraged fear over hope.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, as you encounter new information and ancient narratives? We leave you with this final provocative thought, drawn directly from the material.
What is the true difference between genuine commitment and tragic sincerity when that commitment is applied to 2,000 years of transforming gossip?
Think about the commitment you make to your own narratives. And before you go, please remember to support the author's highly entertaining and critically valuable work by subscribing to the About Something publication on Substack.
If you enjoyed this analysis of the narrative, you need to read the full article. Hit that subscribe button and definitely consider a paid subscription.
Do it. It's the least you can do for an author who's willing to compare the foundations of Western religion to Michael Jackson's Thriller video. Keep questioning the narratives you are given.
And we will catch you on the next deep dive.